and contacted them, but that's a
wasn't
whole
aware of
other
that.
issue that really would get us sidetracked. Basically, they did not say anything that would subtract from the reality of this document. Some researchers have made a fuss that in this document, Admiral Wilson, mentions that Rich and Doug said that they needed speakers for the local chapter of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers.
Right.
And Rich and Doug, when they were contacted, said that he never spoke. So these individuals try to say, oh, that shows the document is fake, it's bull, blah, 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 blah. No, it doesn't. Admiral Wilson never said that he was planning to speak or scheduled to speak or even had time to speak to one of the chapters. He only states that these individuals were telling him they needed speakers. That did not mean he agreed to speak. So that's how people try to create problems that don't exist. How many times have you, Richard, been asked to speak somewhere and you had to decline?
Number of times, of course.
Many times. Now imagine being Admiral Wilson.
What strikes me in this particular part of the document, we're on page 5 here, and again, I've got links below for people who want to go check this out, are the acronyms. And the even here, we haven't even gotten into the bowels of the Defense Department yet, but we've got NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Agency. It's not that it's completely unknown, but there's a lot of very specific nomenclature here and acronyms, and then PACAF and USID, and all of this is just seamlessly put in here. So again, it's not that a hoax would be impossible, at least in theory, but this is of a very high order of sophistication. And you'll notice that no one who's talked about a hoax has offered any credible person as to who could possibly have pulled off a hoax on this level.
Oh, of course. There's
too much.
Yeah, there's too much detail in here. But we don't need to just dwell constantly on how it's not a fake. We really just need to get into the meat of this, because there's so many false arguments that have been brought up about why this is fake. Oh, it has red flags.
I wonder if we might be well served by jumping into an analysis of the secrecy itself and the structure of the secrecy that's indicated in this document. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of detail here that actually, detailed research will benefit. Well, you could say, yes, this exists and this is existing and this exists. But I think it would be very helpful to go into what Wilson actually says, how he went about the process of trying to find these programs, because this gets us into the structure in the DoD. Can we go there?
Well, if you want to go there, that will be very nonlinear, and we'll have to skip ahead. So you'll just have to ask me specific questions, and I can answer. I'll be happy to do that.
How about we just forget what I said and we just keep going on the path that you wanted to go? I think that's probably best after all. Okay. Because we're going to be getting into that structure of secrecy.
Yeah, we'll be getting into that. There's just so much meat in every page of this.
Yeah.
There's more than most people realize.
Good. Let's just keep going then.
Okay. And so basically, Admiral Wilson talks to him and mentions about how, he verified him. He did background checks. Everybody vouched for him, and he gave it serious thought before he actually made the decision to contact him. And Eric Davis mentions in these notes that Admiral Wilson told him that Oak Shannon really supported him in trying to convince Admiral Wilson to actually have this meeting. So we have to really thank Oak Shannon. If you're listening to this, Oak Shannon, way to go. Thank you so much. I know you're a Christian, so I will say this. God bless you for convincing Admiral Wilson to have this meeting with Eric Davis. Way to go, man. And so this page goes on, and Wilson says that he knows Eric Davis would not talk to the press, would not talk UFO groups, that he didn't have media connections. He wouldn't talk to Miller or Greer. He didn't have an interest in publicity, money, fame, notoriety. And then they talked for a little bit about Davis's Air Force career. And then it starts talking A little bit about no mention of NIDS. So Admiral Wilson didn't talk to him about his job working for Robert Bigelow in NIDS. And so now, near the end of page 5, Thomas Wilson actually starts talking about how Miller made him very angry because he violated his personal and professional trust, that there is a camaraderie around Navy officers, and that by sharing, what he was told, Miller telling Greer about, the revelations, that he broke that trust. And now if we move down to page 6, and I'll try to just hit the highlights of this because I know that we need to move on.
I'm with you here. I've got page 6 in front of me, and I will encourage listeners to jump onto page 6 as well at the link I provided.
Yep. And he goes on to say that Miller told Stephen Greer of their conversation, and Admiral Wilson wonders who else Greer told. Eric Davis also mentions very clearly that it was Willard Miller who told Edgar Mitchell, who then told him in 1999. So we find out how Eric Davis heard about, what Admiral Wilson discovered about these special access programs. So we now have a chain of how the information got to Eric Davis. So I think that's really, really
yes.
Admiral Wilson then talks about he received tons of phone calls when the Boston Globe article by Leslie Keene came out. That was an article that basically outed him. That it doesn't go into detail like these notes. It's just the Leslie Keene article. From what I remember, it's been a while since I looked at it, but basically it mentions him, how he tried to get access and he was denied. So it does not have 1/100th of the detail of these notes, but it was the basic story. And Admiral Wilson mentions that flag officers in the Pentagon, lower staff, civilian SES, that stands for Senior Executive Service people. They are civilians that work government jobs, but they're very, very high level. They're the civilian equivalent of like a flag officer. So they're really high up in the civilian service. So he mentions that people in the intelligence community called him, and he kept on getting these phone calls, and he didn't like it, and they kind of made fun at him. And we don't know what exactly he told all these people. I probably think that he did not tell them the whole truth. Most likely he lied to a bunch of them because he could not, while he was trying to get his promotion to the, trying to continue with his career, he couldn't just admit to these programs that they existed and so forth. So most likely he lied to him. He probably hated doing it too, but that's what he felt he needed to do. And I'll just try to hurry this along. I'll just say, as you look at this document, you will see where he tells Eric Davis that if he blows his trust, that he'll deny meeting him, deny everything said, and won't meet with anyone else. Here in this page,
bingo,
claims that it's just too risky because it's a security violation just by mentioning this. He describes these programs as absurdly closely held subject matter, and that he had never seen anything like this program in the black programs community. And remember, he was familiar with black programs. Okay, sure. Doing what he did for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, writing all these reports, he was familiar with all sorts of programs. And for him to say that this was absurdly closely held, we need to take that very, very seriously. And at the very end of page 6, he begins to get into the story of his search for these programs. He mentions at the end of this page that
Davis is like, what happened in April through June of 97? And that's when we really get into the journey.
Yep, here's the journey. This is the exciting part right here, everybody. He mentions that after the end of the meeting in the Pentagon, he started making calls, knocking on doors, and talking to people, and that it went on for about 45 days on and off. Now, moving to page 7, Admiral Wilson mentions how the suggestion came from Major General H. Michael Ward to go through the record group files in Austadt, That is the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology. I believe now it's called something a little different, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, or something like that. So it's the name of it has changed several times. But then to move on, he mentions how he ran into William Perry, the former Secretary of Defense, and he talked to him quietly about this subject. So William Perry suggesting going through the files of the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology. So here you have the former Secretary of Defense helping him.
And the man who undertook a significant reorganization of the Defense Department just a couple of years earlier. He came in with President Bill Clinton for the Secretary of Defense and did a significant reorg. And it appears, and I don't really have all the information on this myself, but that a lot of that reorg had to do with the placement of some of these types of programs that we're talking about here. And hiding them under deeper levels of secrecy. And it also seems to me that Wilson one wonders how much information Wilson gave to Perry in his journey. I mean, I don't really know how clear it is. And, you might wonder, well, why would Perry help Wilson if Wilson had no need to know about this? But it may not be clear. And Perry was retired at this point. He had just recently been retired as Secretary of Defense when this happened.
Well, there's many reasons for the reorganization. There's a bunch of documents online that go into great detail about the reorganization. And one reason, this is only one of several, is that there are many, many of these, and we're going to get into what this means in a little bit, but there were many unacknowledged, waived, carved out special access programs. There were tons of them. The number of UFO programs in that category is probably relatively small compared to all these others. And there was just too many of them. Too many programs were saying they needed this huge amount of security that cost a fortune. And we'll learn further in this document, the price for maintaining the security and secrecy of these programs can be several times the general operational budget. So they were trying to streamline the whole thing, save money. And so there was many reasons. It wasn't just because of these rogue programs. It was for many different reasons. So moving on, both General Michael Ward and former Secretary of Defense William Perry told him of, and this is how it describes it here, a special projects records group not belonging to usual special access programs, but a special subset of the unacknowledged, waived, and carved out programs. These programs were set apart from the rest and buried or covered by conventional, unacknowledged, waived, and carved out programs. Now, I think it's important that we elaborate on these terms.
Yes.
To talk about these different categories right now. So just bear with me when I go through this, because I have prepared what I want to say, because I wanted to make sure I get it just right, because this is a very nuanced issue here. In the ordinary classification scheme followed by the Department of Defense, there are typically three main ordinary categories of classification. And there are a few others that aren't used as often, such as, restricted and a few others. But these, what I'm about to say, are the three normal ones. There's confidential, there's secret, and there's top secret. However, when the usual safeguards for even top secret programs are not deemed, satisfactory by the leadership team of the Senior Review Group of the Special Access Program Oversight Committee, a special access program can be established that will utilize even stricter rules and utilize even more stringent safeguards for the security of the program. When it comes to this first level of special access program with no further classification, it's what's called an acknowledged special access program, not unacknowledged, but acknowledged.
Okay.
Which means the existence of the program can be admitted, but the subject matter or the nature of the program must be, kept secret. So let's just say there was a program, and usually these programs are supposed to each have a code word. Okay, so let's say it was blue tomato. Okay, if it's acknowledged, I could say, yeah, there's a program called Blue Tomato, but I can't tell you what it's about. However, sometimes even turning a top secret program into an acknowledged special access program isn't enough. So they will give it the status of being an unacknowledged special access program, in which both the nature of the program and its very existence, such as the code name I just made up out of the blue tomato, cannot be revealed. So if someone read into an unacknowledged special access program is asked about the existence of such a program, it doesn't matter if you're private and a general is asking you. By law, you must flat out lie and claim it doesn't exist. You would have to say there's no such thing as program Blue Tomato. It doesn't exist.
People have to understand this has been understood for a while, although not widely understood. And I want to just add that within the circle around Dr. Eric Davis, I know a number of those individuals. I will just say that. And for years and years and years, one of the articles that they often cited to me and to other people, I think quietly, was an article written in 2000 by aviation writer Bill Sweetman relating to the Pentagon's black budget programs for Jane's international defense. And it's a very interesting article. And the thing that Sweetman talks about, he was a very interesting writer, but he looked into these special access programs and said exactly what you just have said here, which is that these unacknowledged special access programs, by law, you are not allowed to refer to them, and a no comment is not good enough. And I'm only pointing it out here because it's very clear to me that the people around Eric Davis were deeply, deeply impressed by everything that they learned relating to Thomas Wilson's saga, and found this article by Bill Sweetman as the closest description of what they knew to be the case about these special access programs. And it's something that I referred to in various lectures and presentations over the years after I was shown this article by one of the members of Davis's select circle. So it's very obvious that this reality made a very strong impression on them. You know what I mean? The whole deep structure of secrecy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because the structure is so complex and it's a labyrinth, and people are scared of somehow committing a violation.
Deeply privatized, which was another of the main conclusions of Sweetman in the article, and that also, I think, deeply impressed, the circle around Eric Davis. Yeah.
And I was just going to continue with this. For these types of programs, you can't just say no comment if somebody asks you about an unacknowledged special access program, because a no comment can be taken as a confirmation. So by law, if you have knowledge of one of these programs and you're even a private, like I said before, and the general says, I want to know about program Blue Tomato, you have to make up a total lie about it. I mean, you have to deny it, and you can't just say no comment. It doesn't matter if you intimidated. It doesn't matter what circumstance is. It could be your direct supervisor. And if he's not read into the program, if he's not on the bigot list, which is the access list of everyone allowed to be, to know about such a program, to be read in, you have to flat out make up a story about it. But now what's even more astounding, and this really should blow people's minds about how deep the secrecy goes. There are some programs that allegedly, according to the people running them, need even more security beyond what an unacknowledged classification can provide. So these programs are given what's called a waived status, in which only certain congressional and Senate chairmen can be provided information about them, and then not a full written report, but only an oral briefing if it is requested. However, to be specific here, I want to say what I've heard from some people, that most congressmen and senators don't ask for such briefings on a regular basis, if at all, because they're too busy with their, regular lives, their families, their daily business on Capitol Hill, their election campaigns, all the ordinary scandals they're having to deal with, all
right.
the
So
politics today.
in theory, it's 8 individuals, I think, in theory, have access to
I've
the.
heard, okay,
But in
I've
practice,
heard that
maybe
I've
none
heard,
of them.
I've heard of a term called the Gang of Eight, and it's really complicated because I thought I had it figured out who exactly in the Congress and Senate legally by law would be required to be briefed in, but then someone told me I was wrong, and since I didn't want to argue it, I've basically dropped it since then. But what I do know for a fact is that the people who have a right to be read in are typically the chairman of certain key committees, like the Intelligence Committee, Appropriations Committee, the Armed Services Committee, in the Congress and the Senate. So the chairman and their minority counterparts in the opposite party, by law, get to be read into these programs. And but the thing is, most of them just don't ask, and they don't know about these programs, so they don't know what to ask about, and they don't really care to hear because they have so much else to do. So it's really a sad situation where these senators and congressmen are kept ignorant about these programs. I personally think every year, they need, if it takes a week or a month, these senators and congressmen that have the right to know need to be given a detailed briefing about every program, if they like it or not, if they need to make a dozen pots of coffee to keep them awake, because some of it is probably boring, then they just need to keep them awake, whatever it takes, and brief them because they have a right to know about all this stuff.
The thing is, some members of Congress you can just tell are quite intelligent, and other members of Congress you can tell are really not that intelligent. That's just the reality of it. And a lot of them may not have a whole lot of curiosity about these programs. And as you say, they may not have the time. You can only imagine how busy they are. And these programs are obscure and, could very well be the case. Well, what's in it for them to spend their time on yet another briefing? So in practice, what we're finding is they don't appear, those waived programs, it's quite possible that there may be little to zero congressional oversight over them. And not only that, as we're going to see, not only is there no congressional oversight, practically speaking, but there's very potentially little to zero military oversight and actual formal government oversight over them as well. But you're going to get into that.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And one other little point I would like to add, even if someone gave one of these key congressmen or senators the name of a program to ask for a briefing about, what we have learned due to this document is, let's say Blue Tomato was the code name of one of these, UFO related special access programs. And just for the record, I'm making this up. So please, nobody write an article about program Blue Tomato. But let's just say it was. If they asked for a briefing about it, the official description of Blue Tomato in the directory within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, or Acquisition and Sustainment now, wouldn't list a UFO program. It would be the cover program, and or the sub programs for Blue Tomato, because every special access program can have sub programs. It would have a false description, and we're going to be getting into this because
false description.
These special access programs were not allowing their programs to be honestly and accurately described in the databases, because, as we're going to talk about, Admiral Wilson, yes, he found the descriptions, he found the contact information for the program managers of these special access programs, but to actually find out they were UFO related, other than what William Perry and these other insiders told him, he had to go all the way to their facility and argue with them for them to even admit that they had a UFO. So that's what makes one thing that makes this so illegal, is that they are not reporting honestly to the oversight committees that are supposed to hold them in check to make sure they stay honest. So
very good point, and very, very important point here.
Now there's even yet another category of special access programs. I know this is hard to believe, and I think this is ridiculous for any type of democracy to have this next type of program. But there's such a thing as a carved out program. So now we would be dealing with unacknowledged, waived, and carved out special access programs. In this category, which the DOD was attempting to reduce the number of in the 1990s because of the risk involved, with the carved out program, all the responsibility for inspecting the actual site where the work is conducted, the location of the special access program, the underground bunker, whatever, the responsibility for inspection of that site is transferred away from a division of the Department of Defense. There's an actual group that's responsible for this. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But instead, that responsibility for inspection is conveyed to the contractor. This means that the fox gets to guard the hen house, okay? This is like the restaurant manager at your nearby, restaurant being able to just call up the health inspector and say, you don't need to come today. My restaurant is perfectly clean. We have sanitized all of our surfaces. All of our perishable items are under refrigeration. Right. So you don't need to come by. Goodbye.
The point here being, these are federally funded programs by U.S. taxpayers through the Department of Defense. And these carved out programs, as you're pointing out, don't even have U.S. DOD inspectors or I assume even overseers in any meaningful sense of that, so that it's completely contractor run. That's what you're saying here?
Yeah, pretty much, because with these carved outs, you see, normally the DOD would send a team annually to inspect everything from the security of the computer systems, the antiviral software, the firewalls in place, then even more mundane stuff like the thickness of the doors, the white noise generators on the wall, the types of locks used, the materials of the door that's used, the management of personnel. They have to have like specific reports ready about how they would handle like a leak, their protocols for that. There's hundreds because these documents are online about the general requirements for these special access programs, the security requirements. But with these carved out programs, the inspectors don't get to look.
You can just imagine the potential for theft of public money in this type of a situation.
Yeah, exactly. Someone could be coming in and bringing the grandchildren and letting them run amok in the UFO, and the people in the Pentagon would never know about it. Literally. I mean, we don't know. I mean, that sounds a little out there, and I believe that's very unlikely. But the general concept is when you transfer the responsibility for inspection away from the DOD and you give it to the contractor, they can get away with anything.
Sure.
And that's scary. That is really, really terrifying. I personally believe that these carved out programs shouldn't even be allowed to exist. They are giving a private corporation the right to operate in a bubble with no one watching and no one to look over their shoulder. There's no way to tell if they are violating safety rules, if they are breaking the law in all sorts of ways, if they are conducting, this is a little bit of my imagination, hideous experiments. You've seen science fiction movies where all weird kinds of experiments are being conducted. We just don't know what could be going on.
Here's the thing. If you were to do such hideous experiments, you'd want to do them in a waived or carved out program like this.
Exactly.
The only thing that I'll just add here is when you see the amount of secrecy and protection from any kind of public oversight, I mean, to me, that's a great indicator of where the power is. And the power is in these extremely wealthy, powerful defense contractors And I'll just add, in my interview about a year ago with Dr. Kit Green, formerly of the CIA, where we talked not really about the Wilson leak, except, after the fact, where he gave me his on and off the record statement. But one of the things that he said to me in that interview that was, I thought, quite germane is, he said, when you're in the classified world and you've got security clearances and that type of thing for the U.S. government, when you are in a U.S. government employee capacity, he said, when you retire from federal employ and you go to work in private industry, he said it is a near virtual 100% certainty that your clearances will increase and become more powerful. And the reason is because it is in the private industry is where all the action is. That's where the real power is. That's where the money is. And so that's really what we're seeing with these carved out and waived special access programs and, other USAPs and unacknowledged programs, because that's where the power is. It's in the private industry, not the DOD.
Oh, absolutely. And you can, I want to make another statement about these carved out programs before we moved on, but sure. I have to say, you can look at the career history of all the individuals that have, for example, held the position of Director of Special Programs, which is a critical position within the Senior Review Group, within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, now Acquisition and Sustainment. It seems like that position is usually one of the last positions they hold in their career, second to last usually, or maybe sometimes the last position. And then they go to private industry. They become a vice president or a president in an aerospace company or in some other type of company, and they jump right into the corporate world. So my personal theory is that, especially the position of Director of Special Programs, that's to get people's feet wet. I think they use that position to kind of educate people, these officers, about the black world and what's really out there. So then when they hire them and they probably start working in some of these black programs, they're not so surprised because they've already helped manage them. Not really managing, because in that position, you don't really have any authority over them. Technically, legally, they're supposed to have a lot of authority over them, but in reality, they don't.
I just want to back up. So you're talking about the Office of SAPCO's Special Access Programs Coordination Office. That's the one.
Okay.
Is that and that's the key position? I just want to make sure in terms of bureaucracy, we're talking about the same thing.
We're going to discuss this in a little bit, but I will specify this. When you become the Director of Special Programs for the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, you all of a sudden wear a bunch of hats. Okay, when you get that position, puts you at the nexus of the interface between the black world and the DOD funding apparatus.
Exactly. So that is the office that really we need to be looking at.
And when you become Director of Special Programs, you not only become the co-chairman of the Senior Review Group, you don't only become the Executive Secretary of the entire Special Access Program Oversight Committee, but you also become the Director of the Special Access Program Coordination Office, which I think is now called the Central Office, if I don't have that reversed, because that name changed from Central to Coordination or vice versa. And
because what we're talking about here, this is lingo from the 90s, and it might have changed
somewhat
a bit.
The same. It's somewhat the same, because I have read a bunch of documents, and this lingo is the same. There are subtle differences, slightly different name changes, but it's basically the same principle. Okay. And there have been a bunch of different directors of special programs, and I'm going to talk about this later, so I'll only give a hint about it now. One director of special programs was General William Neal McCasland, I should say, which was Tom DeLonge's original insider.
Right.
And so that's why he was such an important man, like Tom DeLonge always said. But now, what I want to say to finish up about carved out programs is that there's one possibility, which I believe is actually fairly likely, which really scares me. And if there's any congressional people, Senate people, staffers, or anyone in the government listening to this, I really want them to pay attention. Because just imagine, these programs have had alien spacecraft for nearly 80 years, and they have had billions of dollars to conduct research. They may have actually had a survivor from one of the crashes, because, that theme has been ran through, ufological history. And these crash recoveries would have yielded them all kinds of technology. So it makes sense to me they would have attempted to make contact with one or more of these alien species. It just makes sense to me. They would have to. After 80 years, they would. So it opens up the possibility that these private corporations, accountable to no one, with little input, if any, from elected representatives of this democracy, they could be conducting diplomatic negotiations with various extraterrestrial species and making decisions, critical decisions that could impact the future of our entire civilization, while keeping everyone who should be involved in all this out of the loop. That is the scariest thing to me. Who knows what deals they could have made with these extraterrestrial species, because they've had all this time to contact them. If they're flying in their skies virtually all the time, which now we know that's the case because the Navy is encountering them on a regular basis.
And admitting to the fact.
We've seen the videos, and we know there's many, many more videos we haven't seen. If they're flying all over the place, and we know they've been flying, and not just in recent times, going all the way back to the flying saucer waves from the 40s and the 50s, where all the time it was in the front page of newspapers that there was a fleet of saucers that were sighted over a town. Whole communities saw them. If there's that many of them flying in their skies, these special access programs most likely tried to make communication. And if they did, that just terrifies me, because we know they don't have any regard for democracy. They don't give any regard to the public's right to know. And they obviously don't have any regard to the Senate and the Congress, their right to know about this.
This is really a fascinating line of thought. I just want to jump in here and point out, we don't know that this is true. Obviously, we do not know that there are private corporations acting on their own initiative in communication with extraterrestrials. However, I do have to agree with you that the door is open for such a thing. The door is open for all manner of activities that these private contractors could engage in without any responsible military person knowing about, or with maybe more than one or two of them knowing about, and perhaps not even having the power to stop. For all we know, they may not really be able to prevent these contractors from acting on their own initiative, because, frankly, when these generals and admirals retire, where do they go? They go to work for these corporations anyway. That is the system we have, and it's we learn in our junior high school civics classes that we have a system that works in a certain way, but of course it does not work that way. It doesn't work in which the government and governing authorities have final power over a lot of these private organizations. And this is what you're talking about here. So, the scenario you're bringing up is, again, I can't say that we know this is true, but I would agree with you that it is possibly true. And then there are other possible scenarios that are also likely to be, or potentially true. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay, there's many possibilities there, and we can move on. But I just wanted to bring that up because if there's even a possibility that could be true, it's something that must be investigated. The last thing I'll say, and I don't want to bring politics into this, but we all know there's a certain politician, and there was an extremely intense investigation because some individuals thought he could be colluding with Russians. Okay, and so I would suggest
some people have still, they're not giving up. Some of them are not giving up on that. It's incredible.
And so regardless of your opinion on that, I would like to say that the possibility of these special access programs, colluding with extraterrestrials who have been here for a very long time, obviously, since the 40s and 50s. I mean, UFOs been in our skies for thousands of years, but they've been very active since the 40s, and there's many possible reasons for that. If there's even a chance major decisions could be taking place without congressional and Senate input, that has to be investigated, because that's even a bigger deal than possible Russian collusion. Okay, and that's all I'm going to say. Now, as you go on, if you continue on this page, and we are
we're still on page 7, I believe.
We're on page 7. You will see where he admits to getting assistance from 2 other individuals, which are Paul Kaminsky and Michael Kostanek. These are 2 very important people, because they were both members of the previous leadership team of the senior review group, not the leadership team that would end up threatening Admiral Wilson, but the previous group. Paul Kaminsky was the former Undersecretary of Defense, which would have made him typically the former chairman of the senior review group. Okay. And Michael Kostanek was the former director of special programs, this important position we've already talked about. And so that would have made him the co-chairman of the senior review group. And so these 2 individuals would have been in the know about these programs, and they were communicating with Admiral Wilson. And this is really a big deal, because just a few years ago, it would have been their duty to guard this information. Okay, they would have been the ones helping, keep these programs secret. But now they were trying to help Admiral Wilson. That tells
early enough in this whole period. We're still in the 1990s, and so obviously certain types of protocols that exist today, probably not all of them existed at this time.
Yes.
Would you say that, right?
Yeah, I would say that. But I think they must have had these 2 individuals, Paul Kaminsky and Michael Kostanek, who are both still alive. I want to stress that they are alive. They could be interviewed. They could be called by Congress to testify about this whole topic. It seems like they had some motivation to help him, to help Admiral Wilson locate these programs, which is very interesting to me. And so as we move on.
Well, let me just add in something here. So the one argument that was made against Wilson having even the ability to look into this is that, in his position, it's obvious that he should have known that he would not have access to these types of programs that we're talking about here. And I would argue that might be obvious today. We're in the year 2020, but go back more than 20 years, and I would suggest it's not necessarily obvious. Again, there was a recent reorg that had taken place in the Defense Department in the early part of the 90s, and it's not evident to me that Wilson would have known automatically that he wouldn't have had access to look into these UFO-related programs.
Okay.
No, he didn't have the legal authority at that time, but it isn't necessarily clear that he would have known that right out of the gate. So I think it's a false argument.
Well, I would argue that I agree with you to a certain extent, but I would argue this from a different perspective. He had already talked to Greer and Miller about these issues. He had already talked to the former Secretary of Defense. He had talked to these other individuals. He knew these programs were not ordinary special access programs. He knew they were not ordinary wave programs. They were not even ordinary carved out programs. They were illegal programs operating without the ordinary oversight mechanisms. Okay, they were literally misrepresenting themselves to the senior review group and getting away with it. So, like, these programs were bucking the system and trying to hide out and successfully hiding out. He decided, you know what? This cover-up is wrong. It's dangerous. It's a threat to this country I have sworn to protect. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have a right to know this stuff. If I'm supposed to be briefing them about threats anywhere in the world, this is a potential possible threat that they have a right to know about. So you know what? I'm going to buck the system. I'm going to do what I have to do to get in this program. Screw protocol. They're breaking the rules. I'm going to do what it takes to get the Joint Chiefs of Staff the information they have a right to know. That's the mindset I have.
I wonder if that was Wilson's attitude during all of this, then that's just a big wow. That's an amazing thing. And I suppose it's possible, sure. I don't know that's really how he looked at it, but the way you put it, why not, actually?
Well, I mean, technically.
Because he was certainly very angry, in the aftermath of all of this. He was ticked, and he knew that this was wrong. He knew this was illegal. So, yeah, maybe he had that attitude even while he was doing the investigation. I think it would make sense. I think you're probably right.
But look at what Lou Elizondo has stated multiple times, that if these Tic Tacs that they have caught videos of, or the gimbal UFO, or these other, cubes within transparent spheres, or other types of flying objects, just had a Chinese emblem on them, or a Russian emblem on them, it would be the talk of the nation. It would be a giant controversy that the Russians and the Chinese had this technology and they were flaunting their airspace and they were violating air rules. It would be a huge story. But because it doesn't have a Chinese or Russian flag on it, and because they've been called a UFO and there's automatically this giggle factor, it's pretty much a non-issue until recently, where the mainstream getting more interested in it. And so, it's a big deal that these kind of vehicles are in our skies. Admiral Wilson had, his job was to get intelligence and write reports about all sorts of threats from other countries. And this is a potential threat. I'm not saying ET species, or at least most of them, are here to enslave humanity or here for some nefarious purpose. We don't really know for sure, but it doesn't seem that way, because if they wanted to, they could have destroyed us a long time ago. But this was a big deal, and he recognized that. So he was trying to get to the bottom of this, and he knew the rules. He knew the technicalities. He was not an idiot. But he realized from the start that these programs were atypical. They were not ordinary programs abiding by the protocols, honestly reporting, transparently reporting to their oversight committees. He knew that because he had talked to previous members of the senior review group who knew all about them. So that was why he came at it from this perspective. And again, sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, and so there's a time and place for everything. Even Jesus Christ himself flipped over the tables, in the temple, to confront the money changers. There's a time to be outraged and take dramatic action. And that's what he did, in my opinion.
Okay, good.
So anyway,
let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going with this, okay? So in this page, he also talks about how...
Again, page 7.
Yep, page 7. Mm-hmm. Admiral Wilson also talks about how he was told that William Perry, when he had been Secretary of Defense, wanted an investigation into these programs because they were going way over budget. However, he was told to drop it, and apparently he did. Now, this is absolutely terrifying as well, that someone connected to these programs, we don't know exactly who it was that told him to drop it, would have the power and authority to tell the Secretary of Defense to drop an investigation, and that he'd obey that order. Okay? For all those cynics who think that everyone in the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff knew about these programs because they would have had the authority to know about them, reread this. When an organization, whether this was MJ-12 or what...
Yeah, that's incredible. We're talking William Perry, Secretary of Defense, wanted an investigation, and he was told to drop it. You have to wonder, by whom? In theory, the only person above him was President Bill Clinton. Do you think Clinton would have said, don't do it? I'm sure it was not Clinton.
No, I don't think it was Clinton. I think it was agents of Majestic 12, or whatever the control group is currently called. To me, this proves that in most cases, when Majestic 12 or this control group, I mean, there's been many possible names given for it, whatever group runs the UFO cover-up, they can tell the most powerful government or military officials to jump And you know what they do? They obey instantly and ask how high. That's how powerful Majestic 12 is, okay? They get what they want. They are used to it because they have been building up power for, 70 years plus, and they get what they want every time, and they will make sure they get what they want.
Well, let me ask you this. So the next part of that statement where Wilson's saying Perry wanted the investigation but was told to drop it, Davis says, well, who told him that? And Wilson says he didn't want to answer my question on that, said I could find out something from Judy Daly. And Davis has a note there, Judith Daly, Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Advanced Development, Austat. Do we know anything more about her?
Well, I mean, there's not a whole lot online about her. I've done research. There's a few statements, just not about UFO matters, just ordinary references to her, but there's not a lot. Her position was more obscure than, someone like William Perry or even some of these other generals like Michael.
But she's obviously a confirmed person.
Yeah, she's
absolutely we know that she was. And it's just very interesting. So just another piece of extreme detail that comes up from a relatively obscure person. This is the reason I wanted to know, because I don't think anyone really had ever heard of her.
Oh, yeah, she was a real person. There's references to her. So that's another little nugget that proves this document is indeed real. And thank you so much for bringing that up. And now, as we move on to page 8, we see that Admiral Wilson starts talking about how Judith Daly told him over the phone that the whole budgetary record-keeping system was being revamped. She explained to him that security budgets were sometimes cumulative and not annual numbers, so there could be, misunderstandings there. And as we go on, Eric Davis then starts asking him, all these different questions about what special access program compartment did the Admiral Wilson, find the UFO program in? And Wilson responds simply by saying, core secret, won't say. And for people who don't know what a core secret technically is, I'll explain that right now. A core secret is a piece of information that's so sensitive that if released, it could likely result in the immediate failure of a program. So in this way, the very document we're talking about, the Eric W. Davis notes, also known as the Admiral Wilson document, could be considered to contain core secrets, because I believe it could be used, and it is currently being used, to expose the existence of these programs and bring these rogue organizations, MJ-12, PI-40, whatever you want to call them, into the light of day and hold them accountable for their actions over the last 70 years.
Right.
And to move on to going down the page, you see Eric Davis also asked for the code name of the project, and Admiral Wilson once again just says core secret. Then Eric Davis asked who was the project contractor or the United States government agency that runs the program. And Admiral Wilson gives a pretty interesting answer. He says an aerospace technology contractor, one of the top ones in the U.S. And Eric Davis asked about it again, and he says core secret, can't tell.
Right.
Then Eric Davis asked another question, trying to get information. He's
really pressing Wilson here.
He's pushing really hard, and he asked if it was a defense contractor, and Admiral Wilson says, yes, the best of them. Then Eric Davis asked intelligence too. Wilson states it's in their corporate portfolio. Corporate portfolio.
Right.
These clues dropped by Wilson to me make it clear that there are probably other aerospace companies involved in this whole thing. Because if you look at the leadership teams of all these aerospace companies, they trade executives back and forth constantly, okay? However, it really does seem, if you look at this document and the clues that Wilson gave, that Lockheed Martin, I will repeat that, Lockheed Martin is probably this specific corporation that he is referring to that had been managing these UFO reverse engineering programs. Lockheed, it just really fits because It's the largest aerospace contractor in the United States. I think it always has been. I'm not 100% certain, but I think it always has been. It's also considered by most to be the best such contractor. You can also go, and I actually did this, you can go to Lockheed Martin's website, and with very minimal digging, you can see they offer intelligence services. Also, we know that it was Lockheed, probably in coordination with other legacy aerospace companies, that built the Fluxliner ARV, the alien production vehicle.
Exactly.
That we mentioned already, was seen by Brad Sorensen at the Palmdale facility, and other witnesses. And again, the great documentary that I suggest people watch, 0 Point, the Fluxliner ARV. But I also want to say, very importantly, that Tom DeLonge of To the Stars Academy stated, on Coast to Coast AM and different places, and I think in Ask Me Anything, I believe on Beyond Top Secret website, that the anti-gravity black triangle named the TR-3B, and the person who gave it the name TR-3B was actually Edgar Fouché many years ago. Edgar Fouché has passed away, but this craft, which is mentioned in his book, talking about Tom DeLonge's book, Secret Machines, is indeed real. Tom DeLonge, specifically stated that it was real. He also stated that he believed it was built by Lockheed. He stated a lot of this stuff during an interview on Coast to Coast AM in 2016. This was before WikiLeaks, gave the names of his, primary insiders, his original insiders. And now we know that they were General William McCaslin. They were Robert F. Weiss of Lockheed Skunk Works, and they were also General Michael Carey. I believe he was affiliated with NORAD.
Yes, over at Cheyenne Mountain, I believe. Yeah. And
Tom DeLonge claims that these people told him that reverse engineering programs did indeed exist, and that they had, quote, cracked gravity. And what people need to realize is Tom DeLonge repeated for emphasis, cracked gravity, that term, I want to say at least twice in his interview on Coast to Coast AM, and he said it was a real craft. Okay. And I think that since one of his primary insiders was Robert F. Weiss of Lockheed, that's probably who revealed the information to him. Okay. It just makes sense to me. We don't know that for an absolute fact. It could have been William McCaslin told him about, that it was a real craft, but one of his primary insiders did. Now, at the end of this page, Eric Davis asked Admiral Wilson what happened when he found the contractor, and this gets really interesting too. He responds by stating that at the end of May of 97, he made several calls to Paul Kaminsky, Michael Kostanek, and William Perry to confirm that he had found the correct contractor and program manager. They answer him in the affirmative. In other words, they say yes. And this is another reason this document's so important. It's almost as if these individuals helping him maybe possibly developed a disapproval of the secrecy of these programs or how they were being managed or something. Or otherwise, I just don't see why they would have been helping him so much.
It is very interesting. When Davis asks him to reiterate, he says, they confirm, and Wilson says yes. And it's true, like Wilson could never have gotten as far as he did in this journey of his within the bureaucracy if he hadn't had help from absolutely critical individuals in the Department of Defense who, as you have pointed out, were in the exactly perfect parts of the bureaucracy to have been able to help him. And they may have very well been the only people who really could have provided genuine help to him, right?
Oh, yeah. They probably were the only people. They were in the positions to know. They were members of the senior review group, and the Secretary of Defense was the guy who reorganized the black world, at least when it comes to the Department of Defense. Because just remember, this is getting a little off track, but I think it's important. The Department of Energy has their own control system for their programs. Right. The Department of Energy has actually a counterpart, their own special access program oversight committee. They have their own senior review group, and there's actually confirmation of this you can find online, but there's generally less information about the Department of Energy's senior review group and their special access program oversight committee than the DoD version.
I think that's exactly right. My understanding on this is that there are three fundamental areas of where these special access programs are connected. So one is the DoD, which is the one we're talking about here. One is the Department of Energy, and one I think is just through the CIA, through the Central Intelligence.
Director of National Intelligence.
Okay, so a little bit above CIA.
Yeah, he basically is in charge of all the special access programs for all of the different intelligence agencies.
But the understanding that I got is that the DOE, the Department of Energy, is of all of them potentially the one with the least oversight of all and the most and perhaps deepest levels of secrecy.
Yes, exactly. Because, for example, they don't have as much oversight. There's very little written about them online that I can find. There's some documents, but not nearly as much as DOD. Also, I would like to say that they have, I believe it's called the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. I may be butchering that a little bit, but basically it would give the DOE authority over everything in regards to nuclear power or nuclear energy or nuclear materials. So if any UFO that crashed, it wouldn't have to have a nuclear weapon on it. If it just utilized any radioactive element in the craft, then it would automatically fall under the control of the Department of Energy. And so any reverse engineering program that actually was developing a craft that had nuclear materials in the core, or that, for example, maybe even generated nuclear isotopes as a byproduct of the energy production system, for example, that would be considered under the Department of Energy, just like nuclear submarines are managed by the Department of Energy. Okay.
So in the case of this program here, though, since this is not a DOE carve out, this is a Department of Defense carve out, can we therefore make the surmise that this craft that they're studying did not have radioactivity or did not have any known nuclear technology?
Well, that's a possibility. Yeah. That's a possibility. We really don't know what they're doing on the inside because, like I say, they play by their own rules. They make the rules as they go, what's best for them.
I mean, I wonder that it might be possible that there would still be nuclear tech, even if the DOE doesn't have it. I mean, the question is, does the DOE have every bit of nuclear tech imaginable within these structures, or does the Department of Defense get a couple of free gifts, as it were, or does the Director of National Intelligence get a few? It's not clear that we really know. The DOE, in theory, would have control over all nuclear tech in the classified world, but it may be possible that that's not actually 100% of the time. We just don't know, I think.
Absolutely, I agree with you. We just don't know what's going on here. I personally believe that there were multiple different categories of vehicles that were obtained. Eric Davis, in his interviews in recent years, he has admitted there was a long series of crash recoveries. I think some of them may have contained nuclear materials, others did not. So there could be different craft being investigated by different groups, okay? And not every special access program would know about the other special access program. And that's these stovepipes. I mean, stovepipes are everywhere. In the more conventional programs like ATIP, and there's stovepipes when it comes to, in between, these exotic carved out programs. There's a lack of communication here, and it's all due to this insane level of secrecy that has to come to an end.